Welcome back to the Single Malt Review. Today we're reaching for the top shelf and for one of Tim's all-time favourites, for something a little special. Tim?
Yes, indeed. I was recently accused of being very stingy with my scores, which was only half right, because I am perfectly capable of giving high marks. I just don't give them very often, because I can't afford that good whiskey. So, one thing I could afford a few years ago, in which there was just a couple of very lonely drams left in there, so really it needs drinking, we're doing it a service, is this bottle of 18-year-old Springbank. And it's a single cask, and I've formerly tasted this one sometime in the past, and so this time I'll do things a little bit differently, and I will give you my score up front, and then I'll try and articulate why I'm giving it that score. And at the end, Dave can give his and see if he agrees. And the score I'm giving to this one is a whopping 95 out of 100, which is far and away the highest score I have given, and I'm likely to give with whiskies we're able to afford to review for some time, so enjoy. So, Springbank, particularly single cask Springbank, particularly older Springbank, is shockingly hard to find, and when you do find it, it has a bad habit of being shockingly expensive. Not without reason, because it is in many ways a whiskey without peer. Not to say that it is the best whiskey in the world, or that it's better intrinsically than other whiskies, but it is one of the most unique, almost lonely whiskies. There's the Islay style, there's the Speyside style, there's even the Island style, but on Islay, there's at least 8 or 9 distilleries, you know. They have company. Springbank and Campbeltown are almost one and the same. No other distillery, no other whiskey represents so intricately and so specifically the style in the region where it's produced. Campbeltown obviously has a very mixed history. As far as whiskey distillation, used to be the largest region, used to be over 100 distilleries there, and now there are 3, and 2 of them are owned by Springbank. There's the Kilkerran and Springbank itself, and they both produce different styles, and then there's lonely old Glen Scotia, which no one talks about because the whiskey almost never shows up.
Well, they should though. When you get a good Glen Scotia,
oh yeah,
you've got a good Glen Scotia.
A good Glen Scotia is as good as any whiskey on the planet. The problem with the Glen Scotia is that a good Glen Scotia is slightly hard to come by. However, we're not talking about that one. We'll try and find one to talk about, but this is Springbank. Specifically, it's a cask strength Springbank. It's from Duncan Taylor, who are a very good bottler of single cask whiskies, in addition to a few others, and this one is 18 years old, and I'm not sure what cask it came from. I know it was a small one, because it's one of only 250 odd bottles, so it could be a remade sherry hogshead, it could be a very active bourbon hogshead, I'm just not sure. The colour is absolutely peculiar. You'd almost have to call it brown.
It's a kind of a golden brown, yeah.
If you were sort of embellishing it in the tasting notes, you'd call it sort of a golden mahogany with a touch of rose and something, but it's golden brown, essentially. So it's really quite difficult to see what's going on, and with some whiskies, with some, say, more neutral Speyside whiskies, you'd give it a sniff, and it would be obvious. You give Springbank whiskey a sniff, and long before you smell any cask influence, you smell Springbank, because it is some of the most characterful whiskey in the world of whiskey. When I said it defines its style, I really meant it. You can smell a Springbank coming from a very long way away, and it's almost impossible to confuse it with anything else. It's really quite unique. One of the very few distilleries out there where almost anyone, as long as they're vaguely familiar, can nose a glass and say, this is where it came from. That's not easy to do with a great many, but with this, it is.
And maybe it's at high 56.4% alcohol content, but I'm mainly smelling wood, I'm smelling a faint hint of araldite, and a bunch of rather aromatic flowers.
Absolutely. There's quite strong oak on this one, quite a strong fresh oak, which is what makes me think maybe it was some sort of extremely active bourbon cask rather than sherry, because there's no real overt fruit. And you say araldite, what you're smelling there is hopefully not the actual presence of, but the smell of acetone. So that's in your araldite, your model glue for your wee aeroplanes. It's the solvent for a great many fairly powerful adhesives, usually the ones that say do not concentrate and smell, or this and this will happen, you know, things you get people grasping bags in the street sometimes, that sort of stuff. And that is very, very strongly featured in this whisky alongside the Springbank character, which most people refer to as funk, which is descriptive enough, but it doesn't really do it justice. It's sort of it's a slightly foosty, slightly salty, it's almost everything at once. Springbank has a lot of peating that goes into the whisky compared to other ones. I don't know what the ppms are, and it varies depending on which sort of make they're doing. They do Springbank, they do Hazelburn, and they do Longrow. Hazelburn is their more or less unpeated sort of gentle whisky for, I'm not sure who that one's for actually, but and then Longrow is their heavily peated for people that want a bit more in their whisky, but Springbank is the original.
I'm partial to Hazelburn personally. They're probably my favourite.
It's certainly a different style. Kilkerran maybe is going for that sort of thing, but as for other things in the nose, it's really quite sort of sweet and savoury at the same time. There's not a lot of sourness or freshness. It's very pungent, very foosty, very spicy. There's some cardamom, cumin, some slightly odder spices than you normally get out of whiskey, which normally keeps to sort of mace and cinnamon and that sort of things. There's slightly more pungent Indian spices in this one.
On the tongue, I'm getting flavours of a freshly picked passion fruit. When just cut that fruit open, spoons it out, it's sharp and fruity. There's also some capsicum. It could be the spiciness of the alcohol content too.
Certainly passion fruit. That sweet, tangy, and
have you ever eaten some of those edible flowers you get in salads occasionally, geraniums and the like? Some of that kind of thing.
At the moment, it's just a tad too strong at the natural strength of 56.4, so I'm going to cut mine down just a little bit,
I should join you
and something rather uniquely Springbank is going to happen when I do this. And there it is. Strawberry jam, or strawberry compote if you're writing classy labels. It's something that always comes out of old Springbank, and it comes out more and more the older it gets, almost without fail. And it's a complete mystery because it almost doesn't seem to care what cask it's aged in. Getting individual cask expressions of Springbank is tough. They come around once in a few blue moons, but not often.
It's extremely sugar preserved fruit.
All old Springbanks have this lovely, almost like a tinned strawberry thing going on, and it's really, really quite beguiling.
It's influencing the flavour too. The araldite has ceased to be. The FX model has dried, and that's out of the scene now.
That's now much more approachable. Now we're getting that strawberry jam. We're getting brown sugar, a lot of brown sugar. It's much, much sweeter. The tanginess, the sour quality has diminished somewhat, although it's still there, keeping things slightly fresh. For an 18-year-old, it still tastes really quite youthful. It's still a very mouth-watering experience, and it has an awful lot going on. It's really quite difficult in one session to explain and properly describe all the notes in here, but we'll give it a go.
I'm getting some ginger marmalade.
There's gingerbread. It's still deeply wooden, but it's a sort of it's a wet wood, and there's honey and that sugar again, and almost everything under the sun. It's one of the most complex whiskies that I've ever had in the cupboard. It really is. I got extremely lucky.
We're even getting some
when I
hints
found
of the
this one.
ocean here. There's some salted licorice and salted caramel.
There will always be some maritime in Springbank, usually much more than this. This is a much sweeter, richer, more sort of a dessert-styled Springbank than you would normally get. But it's that maritime sort of tang is still there. Springbank is nothing if not a salty whiskey. Some whiskies, you know, Pulteney, that sort of thing, say they're a maritime whiskey, but I think Springbank, although it doesn't make a song and dance about it, really, really is a maritime whiskey. You can really taste that salt. And there's just so much there. It's difficult to describe why it's as good as I'm scoring it. Why it earns that 95 as opposed to something else. And I will admit that some of it is probably a rather psychosomatic exclusivity factor, because old Springbank, independently bottled single cask Springbank, is so astonishingly hard to get. It's impossible to approach it without a little bit of reverence. And so I will freely admit that I'm probably giving it a couple more points solely because it's special. I'm approaching it like it should be a very special experience. But as well as that, it really genuinely is special. It's one of the most complex whiskies I've ever had the good fortune to own, rather than just taste. And I think it's just remarkable. It's got almost everything. It covers the full spectrum of whiskey in one dram, and you could go on almost infinitely about it. And that to me is how it gets all the way up there into that 95. It starts off and it just doesn't stop. Some whiskies, they give you their profile, they're good at what they do, and then they stop. They're either refreshing, weighty, thoughtful, deep. This is almost everything at once. It's a really complete whiskey, and its character is absolutely supreme. It's absolutely identifiable as to where it came from. It's absolutely typical of the distillery while also being totally unique as a whiskey. It's 100% Springbank, and yet you would never confuse it with another Springbank. It's a cask right on its own, and I think it's probably one of the best casks that Duncan Taylor has bottled that I've tried from their range, and I've tried a few. I think this was an absolute stroke of genius, whoever they found this cask. But anyway, that is my attempt to explain why I'm scoring this so high. What do you think?
Well, that's some high praise indeed, and I'm going to have to be a little bit contrary and disagree. I would rate this one a 76. I rate whiskies based on subjective experience. I can't claim to have an objective view of overall quality and characteristic. It's how much do I like it? How much do I appreciate it? This is certainly a complex whiskey. It's got a lot going on. It's unique. It's been well selected by a respected independent bottler. But really, the flavours are too dominated by sharp, solventy, acrid chemical notes and salt for me. There's just not enough of the depth, mellowness, sweetness, maltiness, richness that I'd expect from a whiskey usually, or that I'd look for in something I truly enjoy. This one's just it's a bit sharp, it's a bit on the nose, it's a bit brutal. It feels like it's trying to dissolve me rather than to make me comfortable.
Oh, so there you go. There you go. Some whiskies, the whole convention's flipped on its end, and I'll give it the good score. It just has to be the right one. I think I see why you enjoy Hazelburn in that case.
Yes.
Because Hazelburn is Springbank's very good attempt at dialing back the more overt, sort of on-the-nose character, as you describe it, that their whiskey has. It's their attempt at dialing down the funk. So
more mellow, more accessible, but still expressive in its own right.
I suppose
it's a flavour and a character I simply enjoy more.
I suppose people looking for Springbank, of course I would say dive straight in and get a Springbank. But if you bounce off the Springbank, or you think you might be slightly intimidated by such a punchy and unique style of whiskey, Start with the hazel burn because it will give you an idea, but it won't push you too hard down the really very distinct style of Springbank. It won't be too much of a disaster if you decide you don't like that funk, because
If you want to go even more gently into the Campbeltown pool, then Kilkerran is certainly where I'd start too.
Kilkerran's very new and it's really quite exciting. We should do an episode on that itself because that's getting better and better. Owned by the Springbank company, it's their new little project and it's producing some fascinating whiskey, but more on that later. We'll probably do a proper episode on that. At any rate, this has been the Single Malt Review and a high score by Tim. So there you go. It can happen. Gone rather long, but never mind. Keep well in the meantime, and we will have something for you, maybe even another rum, since you seem to enjoy that last one, very shortly. In the meantime, Slanja.
More.